night, the last night of VBS. I want to start off by just thanking you all for coming. I know some of you have been out every night. Definitely appreciate it. I know it's been great benefit for the kids, and so definitely appreciate you all coming out and bringing the children. And those of you that don't have kids, just coming out and being a part of this, definitely appreciate that. I want to thank Karen and Madeline as well. They've done a lot of hard work. They've learned some new names of the kids, so we're thankful for what they've done. Tonight we're going to talk about God, his power over Satan, Jesus' power over Satan, and the fact that he is absolutely God. And this is where the culmination of all that we've talked about, the importance of everything that we've talked about, ultimately comes down to. This is a verse that was brought up earlier in the week when we talk about John, the 20th chapter, verse 30 and 31. The whole purpose of these signs, and we have some of the signs, these verses say. But what was the purpose of these signs? What were the purpose of these things written? What does it say? The whole purpose. That you might believe. The whole purpose is that you may believe that Jesus Christ is who? The Son of God. And that believing you may have life in his name. That's what this is all about. That's why he did these miracles. We can break them down, talk about various different things that he did, which are awesome and need to be done. But ultimately, this is the purpose as to why these are in this book that we're going to be reading. That John, the Gospel of John here, as he talks about, but in all the Gospels, why they're there is that we can believe that he is the Son of God. And so tonight we're going to look at a few different miracles and really take a different spin on some of the things that we've been talking about. And it's from the perspective of defeating Satan. One of the things that you'll find, obviously, throughout the scriptures is this demon possession and things that were going on at the time that are different from today. And so the first one is Mark, the 9th chapter, verses 14 through 27, which we're going to read in just a minute. This is when we get into the demon possession piece of this, there's a lot of different views. This is normally, or a lot of times, viewed to be as somebody that had epilepsy. Whatever the case is, it was something that man could not do anything. That's the key. He was demon possessed, as it's talked about here, and it was something that only Jesus was going to be able to do. Not even his disciples were able to do this. And it's important as we read this in Mark, the 9th chapter, that it follows the fact he was on the mountain. He's transfigured. He's on this mountain, and he comes down to chaos. As you can imagine, him just wanting to go back up to the mountain. But you think about starting in verse 14 through 27. I've asked Mike Clemens, if he would, to read those verses for us.
And when they came to the disciples, they saw a great crowd around them, and scribes arguing with them. And immediately all the crowd, when they saw him, were greatly amazed and ran up to him and greeted him. And he asked them, "What are you arguing about with them?" And someone from the crowd answered him, "Teacher, I brought my son to you, for he has a spirit that makes him mute, and whenever it seizes him, it throws him down, and he foams and grinds his teeth and becomes rigid. So I asked your disciples to cast it out, and they were not able." And he answered them, "O faithless generation, how long am I to be with you? How long am I to bear with you? Bring him to me." And they brought the boy to him, and when the spirit saw him, immediately it convulsed the boy, and he fell on the ground and rolled about, foaming at the mouth. And Jesus asked his father, "How long has this been happening to him?" And he said, "From childhood, and it has often cast him into fire, and into water to destroy him. But if you can do anything, have compassion on us and help us." And Jesus said to him, If you can, all things are possible for one who believes." Immediately the father of the child cried out and said, "I believe. Help my unbelief." And when Jesus saw that a crowd came running together, he rebuked the unclean spirit, saying to it, "You mute and deaf spirit, I command you, come out of him and never enter him again." And after crying out and convulsing, him terribly, it came out, and the boy was like a corpse. So the most of them said, "He is dead." But Jesus took him by the hand and lifted him up, and he arose.
Think about this story just from the standpoint of the dad, right? How long had this young man had this spirit? What does it say? How long have you been dealing with this? Since he was a child. We've talked in the last few days about people that have been dealing with things. I think about the woman. I think about Gerasenes. You think about all these different people that dealt with things for years. For years they were dealing with them. And you think about it from a parent's standpoint, watching your child go through these things and trying everything you possibly can to help them. So much so that you take them or take him to the disciples of the one that you know he could do something. At least you think he can. He goes to the disciples, and this will go on and talk about why the disciples couldn't, but we're not going to talk about that tonight. But it's amazing what he says about them. I took them to your disciples, and what could the disciples do? Nothing. You imagine the crowd being around the disciples. Please take this spirit out of him. And they couldn't. They couldn't do it. So Jesus is coming down the mountain, and this man comes up to him and starts talking to him. But Jesus says, "Why are you disputing with them? What is the problem?" Well, there was a guy that we were not able to do that. The son, he brings the son up to him, and he starts talking about what he was going through. And what does Jesus say in verse 19? It's a side note. I should have just stayed up on the mountain transfiguration. I should have just stayed up there. Oh, unbelieving generation. How long shall I be with you? How long shall I be with you? How long shall I put up with you? Bring him to me. You see, again, the human, the God part of this, it's just an awesome thing to really put yourself in this situation. The other thing that you'll see in Mark's account is a lot of times it'll use the term immediately. You have that a lot in the Gospel of Mark, and this is some of those times that he does that. He brings them to him, and when he saw him, what did the Spirit immediately do? Immediately do. They see Jesus. He sees Jesus. What does he do? One last party. He convulses, it talks about. He falls on the ground. He began rolling and foaming at the mouth. And then Jesus asked him a question that I believe he already knew the answer to. But what does he ask him? How long? How long has this been going on? From childhood, the dad says. It throws him down into fire, into water, trying to kill him. And then the phrase that is used that we're going to talk about for a minute. But if you can, take pity on us and help us. And what does Jesus say? Now, we may read this differently. I'm going to tell you how I read it. If I can do this, that may be more of a Scott Taylor thing, but if I can do this, what does he say? What does he say to him? If I can what? So he turns it back. We have this faith conversation now. It is possible, obviously all things are possible for the one who believes. So we'll talk about that in just a second. But you think about this perspective. This man had seen his disciples not be able to do this. He has tried so many different things to try to help his son. And now he's before the one. And if you can, please help him. Have some compassion on us. Have pity on us if you're able to do this. If you can. And then he talks about his belief. I'm going to tell you, this is sometimes where we're stuck as God's people. If I can. We could say all day long that we can do all, or God can do all things that he wants to do. We'll quote Philippians, the 4th chapter, verse 13. I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. Out of context most of the time. But we'll quote the verse. Powerful verse. And you think about that perspective and the attitude that we need to have. And then we come back to this. If you can. Not if it's your will. That's a whole other conversation. But if you can. Is God able to do all things or not? That's the question that we really have to come to the conclusion of. Here, it's about this faith, which we're going to talk about in just a minute. But Jesus' response when he's talking about this is powerful. It is so powerful. If you can, all things are possible for the one who believes. Immediately, the boy's dad cries out, it says. You imagine the difficulty that this dad was going through. He cries out, I do believe. Help my unbelief. What does that mean? And this is another part that we may get caught up in. What does that mean? Mm-hmm. Yeah. 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 Imagine this one. He just said to me in verse 23, so this is Jesus obviously talking right before the man says this. All things are possible for the one who believes. I believe. I believe. Help my unbelief. Right? It's a continual growth process all the time of our belief, of our faith. We're always constantly growing and always constantly looking for opportunities to continue to grow that faith. There are times where you may be tested or will be tested, and your faith is going to grow. Or at least that's the opportunity that we have. And you have a situation here where this man is before God. He has this son with him who's convulsing. And he just tells him, I believe, help him, I believe, help my unbelief. And Jesus is going to do exactly that. But I think, again, this is one of those stories that I think we can understand the dad in many times. How this dad reacts to things, how he views different things. If you're able to do this, I, in my life, certainly have gotten caught up in that. I believe, help my unbelief. I need to continue to believe. There's still things that I struggle with. I also thought that your disciples were going to be able to do this, by the way, and they couldn't do it. And so you think about all the different perspectives, all the different things that would have been going through this dad's mind, but ultimately what this comes down to is that God is greater than anything that we go through. So when we say, if you can, we have to stop and say, I know you can. There's no question that you can. I need to have enough faith and trust that you can. That's the issue, my part, making sure that we're continuing to grow. But there's no question that he can. Whether or not he does, again, that's a whole other conversation. But there is no doubt that he can. You'll have people talk about, does God heal people today? Yes. Yes. If he doesn't, stop praying for it. But if he does, he absolutely does. The danger is when we doubt it. Help my unbelief. We know he can. I know he can. And so we have to have enough confidence in him that he's actually going to do it. You imagine this dad just watching what happens here. He takes him to this one that he knows, I know you can do it. And what happens next? Jesus commands it. And what's the first thing that occurs after he commands it to come out? He looked so much like a corpse that most of the people said, he's dead. He's dead. I brought him to you. You're going to heal him. I just heard you say it. And now he's dead. And I love how the scriptures will understate things all the time. In verse 27, Jesus took him by the hand and raised him and he got up. Can you imagine that? He's dead. Jesus just reached down, picked the boy up, and let's go. And the boy gets up and he goes back with his dad. You imagine the dad going home. Did he just help his belief? Yeah, absolutely he did. This boy is back to normal, if you will, from that standpoint. God showed his power, right? There's no question about that. And we certainly see, as it goes on in 28 and 29, it doesn't even focus on the son and the father. It goes back to what the issue was with the disciples in particular. But you just imagine that change, that immediate change that occurs for that family is just absolutely awesome. Any other thoughts on this one before we continue? Yeah. Yeah, and even in that standpoint, if everybody else does, it's going to, how did he react to this story? So if an application piece of it, if everybody else doubts, that shouldn't necessarily have an impact on my faith and when the situation that's going on. And that can be very difficult from a crowd setting, if you will. And it's powerful to see how Jesus handles these things. And for us to read these stories and apply them to our lives, just like we read in John 20. This is written for us to believe that he is the Son of God. This man left with his son saying, surely that was the Son of God. He just brought my son back. He gave me my son. Nobody else was able to do that, but Jesus Christ could. When we talked this week about various things that we've talked about, people that were Jairus' daughter was dead. You think about that from a spiritual perspective. There are people whose children are spiritually dead, and all they want is for their children to be raised. I want them to come back. And Jesus Christ is the one that's able to do that. And we can have faith and confidence in that. People have choice. There's absolutely the choice that people are going to make. But he's the one that changes lives. Whether or not we believe, he can change lives where people we think are so far gone. He can change lives. We have a part to play. Absolutely. And so does the person of what we're talking about. They have to be willing. But there is no question God's end of the stick is always done, is always ready, and it's always able to do what he's able to do. And we've got to make sure that we make the most of those opportunities, not deciding for ourselves, that person, there's no way they're going to obey the gospel. That's between them and God. They get to decide that. We should not decide those things. And so we have to be very, very mindful when it comes to this application. If I can, you better believe I can. Help my unbelief. Help me trust you more. Help me continue to grow as a child of the living God. That's a powerful story, at least to me. Jonathan? And you think about it from, again, that perspective, the dad willing to stay. If the disciples couldn't do it and Jesus hadn't come down the mountain yet, why would I stay? I'll just leave. I mean, I tried. You couldn't do it. I'll just go my own merry way to another person that may be able to do it. Instead, he stays. He knows that this is the one I need to talk to, and that's exactly what he does. It's just, again, from an application standpoint, hopefully you can see yourselves in these stories. They're so powerful from that standpoint. There's always an opportunity to continue to grow. No matter what the things that we're going through, there's always an opportunity to practice patience. There's always an opportunity to realize that God's will does not necessarily mean I'm going to get everything that I want. It's not going to happen. It's God's will. And whether or not we trust him enough to actually be okay with his will, that he's okay, it's okay the things that he does. True? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. We're going to talk if we have time, so we probably won't get to the point of just understanding how powerful our enemy is, how powerful he is. Not anywhere near, obviously, in comparison to God. That's not even the issue. But to us, compared to us, and understanding the enemy of what occurs here. And it's a fascinating story. And it kind of takes us into the next one we're going to talk about in Luke, the 8th chapter. If you turn over there. This involves the death of pigs, so I apologize for some of you. When you think about all the different things and that occurs in these stories, and I want you to notice in this particular story what humans were able to do and then what God's able to do. Okay? That's something we've been talking about this week. Tyler, will you read?
Then they sailed to the region of the Gerasenes, which is opposite Galilee. When he got out on land, a demon-possessed man from the town met him. For a long time he had worn no clothes and did not stay in a house, but in the tombs. When he saw Jesus, he cried out, fell down before him, and said in a loud voice, "What do you have to do with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? I beg you, don't torment me." For he had commanded the unclean spirit to come out of the man. Many times it had seized him, and though he was guarded, bound by chains and shackles, he would snap the restraints and be driven by the demon into deserted places. "What is your name?" Jesus asked him. "Legion," he said, because many demons had entered him, and they begged him not to banish them to the abyss. A large herd of pigs was there, feeding on the hillside, and the demons begged him to permit them to enter the pigs, and he gave them permission. The demons came out of the man and entered the pigs, and the herd rushed down the steep bank into the lake and drowned. When the men who tended them saw what had happened, they ran off and reported it in the town and in the countryside. Then people went out to see what had happened. They came to Jesus and found the man the demons had departed from, sitting at Jesus' feet, dressed and in his right mind. And they were afraid. Meanwhile, the eyewitnesses reported to him how the demon-possessed man was delivered. Then all the people of the Gerasene region asked him to leave them because they were gripped by great fear. So getting into the boat, he returned. The man whom the demons had departed begged him earnestly to be with him. But he sent him away and said, "Go back to your home and tell all that God has done for you." And off he went, proclaiming throughout the town how much Jesus had done for him.
Thank you. We got a new microphone we're testing out, by the way, if you're wondering what's going on. When you think about the human side of this, what had they tried to do for this man? What did they try to do? Chain him. They tried to help him, help the situation, help people be able to walk by him, whatever the case may be. But it was not enough. Okay, so again, when we talk about these demons, which we're going to get into in just a second, we're not talking about just a simple problem that was going on. This is powerful, powerful things that we're talking about. However, I love this story for a number of reasons. One of the reasons is the fact of the reaction of the demons. These demons were in this man, and Legion, you probably have heard that in various places, but Legion is what the name is. And so Legion is taking this man in their total control of him. Man is scared. Humans are scared of it, which you should be. What do the demons do when they see Jesus? Yeah. Verse 28. So this story we'll talk about, and really in this context we'll talk about fear. There's a lot of fear. One of the fearful groups, if you will, are the demons. These demons. And seeing Jesus, he cried out and fell down before him and said with a loud voice, "What business do you have with me, Jesus, the Son of the Most High? I beg you, do not torment me. Do not torment me." Now later on, he adds something in verse 31. What else was the concern of Legion? Don't throw me in the abyss. Yeah. Don't throw me in the abyss. Whether or not we fully understand everything that was going on in this story, that's fine, doesn't matter. We can talk about it, obviously. But the reality is, what do we learn about the demons when it came to Jesus? Oh, Sean. Yeah, exactly who he was. James tells us that, right? They knew who he was, and they would shudder. They were scared to death of this one who was able to take them and throw them into the abyss. Throw them into the abyss. Torment us. You're going to torment us. This is their perspective of the one who left heaven, came here and took our place to die to give us the opportunity to be with him for eternity. And the ones that were causing the issues at the time are scared to death of him. If I can, help my unbelief. You think about that power of this one that we are talking about. And his interaction between him and the spiritual realm, that we're privy to a little bit here, but you see they knew who the Son of God was. They know his power. And they know ultimately where they're going to end up. And it's amazing how God handles this situation and how his enemies view it. They had no shot. Scared to death watching Jesus walk to them. That is an amazing, profound thing to me when it comes to building our faith, understanding our God and the power that he has. Brian? Isn't it interesting that they were showing no mercy to the man, but that's exactly what they wanted from God, Jonathan?
It's amazing that there's no fight, right? It's not like a movie where the big bad guy shows up and the big good guy, and they duke it out for a long extended battle. And there's not even a fight. Jesus shows up and they're horrified, and they can't go anywhere without Jesus' permission. So they beg him to be able to go into the pigs.
Yeah.
Not to even put there on
Yeah.
I
I totally agree. It reminds me so much of Revelation. Revelation is this great book of victory, and the fact in the ultimate battle that it talks about, God wasn't even there. He didn't have to be there. He was obviously involved. There's no question about that. But the way it's described, it's his angels. There was no question that God is going to win. There's no question that his power is beyond all that we can comprehend it to be, including those that, let's be honest, if I saw a demon come in here, I'd be scared to death of. And they would be scared to death of God. Right? You think about that perspective, that I have the opportunity to be on his side. Now, the opposite is true as well. If I choose not to be, you should be scared to death of what's coming. And that's the danger for this, to the points that have been made. God was able to handle this situation for the man. And so there are things from a human standpoint we need to do, we're able to do. In this story, they did all that they could. You always think of when Lazarus was brought back from the dead, Jesus didn't have to have them move the rock. He could have moved it. He didn't have to have them go in. He certainly could have taken care of that. He could have had John just come out. But he had man do what man does, and he did what man was not able to do. It's the same for us. We can bring people to God. God's the one that's going to take away their sin. God's the one that's going to be doing his part. Both sides, obviously, need to be done. But when you see these stories, and this is the point of tonight's class, it's his power, the power over Satan that we're talking about. And so when you think about it, as Jonathan just said, they say, can we go in the pigs? Sure, go in the pigs. And in verse 33, they all drowned. Now, you have a choice to make if you're the herdsman in this story. They're scared to death of who? Jesus. And they say, get out. Please leave us. So their reaction to this is going to be vastly different than perhaps what our reaction may be to it, or if we were to see this. And it's, by the way, it's a different reaction to what happens on the other side of the sea in the context here. But that's their reaction. I can't believe that you got rid of that. They didn't even consider at this point the man. He just tells them to go back home. He's fine. This guy that they couldn't even control, he's back. Everything's good. And they want him out. Now, some of it's going to have to do with financial reasons. They just lost all their pigs, which is highly upsetting. But you think about it from that perspective. They saw this in their situation, and they had great fear in verse 37 that they just want him to go. Just go and make sure he doesn't come back at this point. It's just a powerful, powerful story when you see the power of our Almighty God. So any other thoughts on this one? Not that I'd only want to spend a little time on this one, but this ultimately is the thing, right? When you talk about our God and what he is able to do, and you talk about rising from the dead. I brought up Lazarus earlier. Lazarus is an amazing story, and we all know that. It's a powerful story. It's amazing that the Pharisees in the next chapter in John 12 were wanting to kill Jesus and Lazarus. What did Lazarus do? Just came back. But they wanted to kill him. He was a witness. He was an issue to them. But now you have Jesus. They know full well that Jesus is dead. He died a horrible, horrible death. The Romans knew exactly what they were doing when it came to death. They know That boy that we just read about may have looked like a corpse, but nobody went up to him and checked. They knew Jesus was dead. There's no question about that. They put him in the tomb. And then all of a sudden, Luke 24, other passages that we've looked at recently in Jonathan's class, talking about this resurrection of what occurs. And it's so amazing that it's hard to believe that it occurred for the people that were there. The women run back to the apostles, the disciples, and what did the disciples do? Did they believe it? Oh, it's like nonsense. What are you talking about? Now, Peter and John run over. But you think about it from that standpoint, even the ones that were the closest to them, he was the closest to, struggled with this. Struggled with this. His power over death is the whole reason why we are here. This is what makes him the Almighty God. This is so awesome when you think about this story or the stories that occurs here. The fact that he was the road to Emmaus and the people were talking to him and he said, "What happened?" And he starts talking to them about that, and then he shows who he is, and they run back to Jerusalem. And you have all these different pieces that occur from that standpoint. This is his power. And so when we think about it from that standpoint and what it means to us today from an application standpoint, perhaps some of these are the verses that come to your mind. Philippians, the 2nd chapter, when you talk about Jesus and his name, he was willing to leave heaven to come here to die for us, and that we're all going to bow before him. 1 Corinthians, the 15th chapter, when he talked about the ones that he saw, the ones that he showed himself to after he rose from the dead. But then you get to the end of chapter 15. And the thing that all people, as Brian said last night, since the kids aren't in here, we're all going to die. It's okay. We have to be okay with that, right? But 1 Corinthians 15th chapter is God's people. What are we told? Yeah. It's still obviously a difficult thing. It's still a sad thing. It's still a mourning thing that we do. But death is swallowed up in victory, verse 54 says. Where, O death, is your victory? Where, O death, is your sting? The sting of death is sin, and the power of sin is the law. But thanks be to God who gives us the victory through our Lord Jesus Christ. What an awesome couple of verses that is. And the danger, as we have talked about so often, is we just read it and don't really pay attention to what it says. The thing that you're scared of, that most people are scared of in this world, besides public speaking, is this. Right? That's what people are scared of. And he says, you're going to have victory in Jesus over death, even over death. That is our God. That is the hope, the faith that we need to have. Ephesians, the 1st chapter, will go into the various different pieces that we have of spiritual blessings and how we've been redeemed, we've been adopted, all the different pieces that play into it, not simply saved, which is awesome, but also the fact of all that comes with being a child of the living God. That is his power. The question is, do I believe it? If I can, that's where we have to really make sure that we are studying his word, that we're applying his word, and that we're truly understanding the opportunity that is before us. Truly understanding. So, any other thoughts on this piece? There's one more part, but I'm trying to be nice. So how powerful is Satan? How powerful is he? Okay. Sure. Mm-hmm. Sure. Job, the crucifixion of Jesus, right? The Garden of Eden. How powerful is he? If you take God aside for a second, okay, how powerful is he? None of us are going to be saved. None. Until we put God back in the picture. So please understand, don't tune me out yet. He is so powerful from that standpoint, the great tempter, that we've all sinned. We've all fallen for the temptations that are out there. Brandon, what are you going to say? Yep. So that certainly goes back to Job. God allowed him to do various things that happen, Brian.
I think about all the stories that we're given where man encounters an angel and falls on his face, and you already referenced it with Revelation 12. He's battling angels. That should give us some frame of mind as to where we fit into that schema of hierarchy, and he is very powerful.
Yeah. So what I want us to, go ahead, I'm sorry.
John says, greater is he who is in you than he who is in the world. And that's a reference to Jesus.
Mhm.
So, God being in us, Satan is not powerful.
That's the next part. Right, so the understanding of the enemy, there is no question he is powerful. And I want to make it very, very clear, he's powerful. He is compared to a lion, right? There's no question he's powerful. He is nothing compared to God. Nothing. So much so that the scriptures are written in past tense of victory over death, victory in Revelation. It's over. God won. Well, we're still living. We're still choosing the things that we're going to do. But God has won. That's the power of our God. And so, yes, Satan is powerful. The world is dark. But they are nothing compared to God. Nothing. Now the question is, if I can, can I change America? If I can? What are you talking about? Lord, I believe you can. Help my unbelief. There's a part that we play in it. But the question so often for me is, am I doubting God? Am I putting my doubt in him rather than my trust in him? It may not end up exactly the way that I want it to be. As I said earlier, it's his will. But never question his power. He is absolutely able to do beyond all that we comprehend or imagine him to be able to do. And our children have got to know that. We've got to teach them that. Because they're going to be bombarded with things in the world. And if they see you so distraught and so distressed and stressed out by everything that's going on and how horrible it is, do you really think that God is powerful? He's all powerful? Is he the one? Are they hearing that? Are we teaching them that? That's where we come in. And that's the danger of the next generation. I think it's awesome. We have the opportunity in a dark world to continue to let our light shine. Is that everybody's reaction to it? Probably not. But that's my view of this. How powerful is my God? I don't care how dark it is. That's the attitude that we need to have. And if more of God's people have that attitude, watch out. That's what's going to happen. But it comes down to each and every one of us of whether or not we're willing to do that. There is no comparison between the two. None. But never forget, if you don't have God, you have no shot to beat Satan. If you have God and you draw near to him, as James will talk about, and he's in your heart, Satan has no shot. None. And that's the attitude that we need to have, and that's the attitude that we need to be living by as we go through our lives. So, any other thoughts before the children come in? Brian?
James speaks to, I love this point in chapter 5 about Elijah being a man just like you and me and praying, and by the power of God bring that righteous man, right? So it doesn't bring right. And I think about the little box that I put
Mm-hmm.
when I pray for, and Elijah is knowing God better and so much more.
It's interesting at the perspective of prayer anyway. Anything that we go through in this life is small to God. It's big because it's us. He wants to help us. He cares for us. But sometimes you'll hear people say, well, that's just too small. I don't want to. Well, it's all small. He was asleep in the boat. I mean, it's small. There's things that we're going to go through from that perspective, meaning he's all powerful. He can do all. So we just got to understand our God. There are people going through horrific situations. There's no question about that. But that doesn't change who that God is. It doesn't change his power. The question is the trust and whether or not we're really trusting him that we're going to be able to get through things. It doesn't make it easier necessarily, but it does mean that God is going to be with you and that we can have that confidence in him. So when we talk about this and the kids yell it, which is amazing, and it's getting louder, and I'm glad this is the last night because I can't imagine tomorrow night. But that's for us too. Did he do it? Did he really do these things? If he did these things, what are we worried about? What are we concerned about? His power is beyond all that we can comprehend. And so when you think about his perspective or that perspective and what he is able to do, the things that you go through in this life are nothing. I appreciate it.